So I'm paddling around in the unfathomably large puddle we call the internet, and I come upon something called the Big Read, which the BBC created some years ago. People voted for their favorite book of all time, and the BBC compiled that into a list of 200 books. Now, I don't hold much with lists or top tens or anything like that. It's all arbitrary and eminently subject to debate. But curiosity eats away at me, so I took a gander at the list. The Big Read. And one thing I took away from it was that the author with the most books on it, namely 15, was Terry Pratchett, which was especially interesting to me because I had never heard of Terry Pratchett. So I looked him up. He died a few years ago, wrote fantasy and sci-fi books, and it's Sir Terry Pratchett, because if you sell as many books as he did, about 100 million, they make you a knight for your contribution to literature and the nation's economy. I thought I should read a book by Sir Terry, so I put a hold on one called Good Omens, number 68 on the list. When I got it, a fat paperback, I could see that it was written by two men, Sir Terry and Neil Gaiman. Ordinarily, I won't read a book written in collaboration, but I had this one in hand, and I figured, what the hell. I believe the book was a great success that brought them a lot of money and became what is called a cult favorite, which means there is a loyal group of readers who absolutely adore the hell out of the book. And the book has a lot of hell in it. It's about the apocalypse, Armageddon, the end of the world. It's a humorous book, and in the end, the apocalypse doesn't happen because babies were mixed up in the beginning, and the Antichrist was placed with a regular human family, and over the years that humanity rubbed off. Nurture, it turned out, was an effect as great as nature. The book reminded me of War and Peace, which I had just finished. Both are long, with a large cast, names that are hard to pronounce and remember, and both had epilogues. It also reminded me of Dickens, with many eccentric characters. Elvis makes an appearance, a cameo, flipping burgers in Iowa. And it reminded me of Kurt Vonnegut's funny, spacey novels, which had a childlike tone. There are a bunch of precocious youngsters in the story, and sometimes it seemed like it was almost written for adolescents, which would be G-rated or maybe PG, which is odd for a near apocalypse. Since the apocalypse doesn't happen, the book is much ado about nothing. It reminded me of vaudeville, especially the demon and angel who are somewhat in charge of seeing to it that the world ends. The two are slapstick characters, the demon rather lovable, the angel somewhat mischievous, a friendly pairing. But since the apocalypse doesn't happen, the climax is anticlimactic, and that's a problem because the book is rather long, much too long for me. It's very silly, and the silliness, though inventive, wears thin. It did for me, but remember, it was a big seller and a cult favorite. I could see Monty Python doing this, except there'd be songs. Maybe because there were two authors, that explains the length. They each wrote a book and then wove them together. At the end, after the epilogue, the two authors explained how they wrote it. One of them had a story he couldn't finish, showed it to the other, who sat on it for a while. They gave it some thought, banged it back and forth like a badminton shuttlecock, relaxed, enjoyed each other and the task before them, which was unspooling this story, letting it play out as if they were not creating it, but rather transcribing the text from a copy, a very ancient vellum-bound copy found in an antiquarian bookstore, which in turn was based on a text supposedly written in the stars, something like that. It's a good book. I can see why people would hook into it, even dress up as the characters, but it wasn't for me, not as a big read. Brits seem to have a thing for wizards and witches. That life is much more interesting than poor old humdrum reality on a rainy little island. Anyway, it was nice, if I may use that word, as they meant it, to meet Sir Terry.